September 19th, 1944, near Arracourt, Lorraine, a German Panther crew inched through morning fog. The driver stared at gray, nothing else. His frontal armor, 4 inches of hardened steel, had held for months. Every briefing said it. Nothing American could punch through. The Panthers' 75mm would fire first. Out there somewhere were the Hellcats. Thin-skinned, light, barely armored. German crews called them paper tigers. One hit would split them open. In this fog, the Panther owned the field. The first Panther never saw it coming. An M18 Hellcat shot out of the fog at full speed, engine screaming. The gunner called out angles, left, left, now, and the round punched into the Panther's side, right behind the road wheel. The Hellcat's brakes hissed. The hull twisted around. The commander was already shouting, "Back, back, phase line B." They were moving before he finished yelling. A second later, heavy fire tore through the hedgerow where they'd just been ripping up dirt and shredding branches. The crew heard it as they dropped down the other side of the slope. They made it. They'd stolen 2 minutes back. It's March 23rd, 1943, at El Guettar in central Tunisia. Before sunrise, the temperature's dropping fast, winds whipping dust into every crack of your face, and the rocky ridges ahead look like broken teeth stretching across the horizon. That morning, Ray Desfosses was there, an M10 gunner with Company A, 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion, pressing the gun sight into his eye socket and staring through the crosshairs until they finally stopped bouncing around. The M10s were parked behind a low ridge, hull down. From where the Germans were, all they could see was the gun barrel and the top of the turret. The crews had been out in the dark, feeling their way to the right angles, counting traverse turns by hand, testing the radio system over and over. Desfosses heard the platoon leader's voice crackle through. "Hold, fire, hold," the loader whispered. "On, AP, armor-piercing rounds, loaded and ready." The commander kept his head down, watching dust drift over the barrel like smoke from a candle. Everything was still. Everything was waiting. Then shapes started showing up. Flat shadows against the lighter sky at first, then they got taller, more defined. Tank shapes. German tanks were coming over the ridgeline. The lead tank showed its underside for maybe a second as it crested. Desfosses called out, "On." He squeezed the trigger. The 3-inch gun slammed the turret backward. A shell casing rang off the turret floor like a bell. The loader's hand was already moving. Grab, feed, next round. The second shot came before anyone even talked about the first one. Here's the problem. Do you keep firing from this good position and gamble that enemy artillery will take a minute to land? Or do you stop and move the vehicle before that counterfire shows up? The platoon chose to keep breathing. Shift. Down 1. Move, the commander said. The tracks churned. Dust swallowed them whole. A minute later, shells landed right where their barrels had been. They were already gone. Their gun isn't the biggest in North Africa. Their armor definitely isn't the thickest. But they owned that ground because they'd walked it before dawn, because they thought in angles instead of inches. The first shots broke up the top of the German column and scattered the rest into panicked moves and bad positions. In that mess, those M10s slipped into a second spot they'd already scouted at sunrise. When the next German tanks tried the same ridge crest, they got the same surprise. On, fire, move. Then the pattern repeated. By mid-morning, the battalion's companies filed reports that later turned into numbers on a staff officer's desk. Dozens of German tanks destroyed across the whole sector, and with them went the entire German attack's momentum. The 601st paid for it. Some tank destroyers lost. Men wounded and killed, but the line held. Years later, Desfosses remembered the sound and the smell more than any numbers. He wanted to look over once and see what they'd hit, but the commander said, "Don't. Move." Shell casings piled up around his boots, and he stepped on them when the turret swung. The ground felt safer than steel, because the ground could hide you. Steel just rang like a bell when rounds hit it. That afternoon, the reports reached higher command. The 601st got a citation for that day's work. But here's the real lesson. The M10's advantage wasn't bigger guns or thicker armor compared to German tanks. It was geometry and timing. Hull down means the tank destroyer sits in a dip or behind a ridge, so only the turret and gun stick up. When a German tank tries to cross that ridge, it has to show its weaker side armor, its belly, for just a second. That's the window. The crew fires when the German tank can't shoot back accurately because the shells are still in the air, but that window closes fast once the Germans figure out what's happening. The M10 crews have maybe 90 seconds before counter-battery artillery lands on their spot. 90 seconds to fire, see where it hit, reload, fire again if they can, and then move to the next position they already scouted. A 3-inch gun at the right second beats a bigger gun at the wrong second, every single time. But only if you move before your own success gives away where you are. By evening, the wind dies down, the ridge goes quiet except for the clink of metal on metal and the cough of engines that still work. A man picks grit from his eye and finds it's not grit at all. It's a fleck of paint from a spent shell casing. He pockets it without thinking about why. Years later, that piece of paint sits in a drawer, and he tells someone, "That was the day I learned that speed is armor when you don't have any." Position first, the M10s were dug into an angle that forced the enemy to show their weak side as they came over the crest. Timing second, the crews fired when the enemy was exposed, when the Germans couldn't shoot back straight, when the ridgeline was working for the defenders. Speed third, before the Germans could drop artillery on them, the M10s were backing into the next fold of ground, into the next position they'd scouted at dawn. The 3-inch gun wasn't magic. It was enough because it was used inside a window that closes fast. By night, the crews are exhausted and wired. They count ammo, count friends, who made it back, who didn't, and think through what they did right that day and what they won't do again because those things get you killed. They sleep in shifts with their boots on because morning out here is just a darker shade of day and they need to be ready to move. What they learned by surviving it, what got burned into their bodies that day, that's going to decide who lives when fog rolls in over Lorraine. The tactics they figured out on the fly at Guettar are going to save lives in mud and snow and darkness before this war is done. Arracourt, September 19th. First Sergeant Roy Roberson pressed his pencil onto damp paper and jotted down the time. The fog was coming in thick, and he could hear the first muffled gunfire echoing across the field ahead. The platoon was already moving before he finished the line. Someone yelled, "Left 30 now." The tracks squealed in the wet clay. The commander kept the turret pulled back from the hedgerow so the gun wouldn't catch. The driver was basically feeling his way, couldn't see much of anything. The Germans came in hard, confident. Fresh Panther brigades figured the Americans would be right where the map said. Instead, they found nothing until a round caught one broadside, detonated right behind the wheel. The Hellcat darted to a new angle and fired once. If it worked, great. If not, the next shot was supposed to come from somewhere completely different. Roberson scribbled, "Fog thick as milk." He also wrote down what he saw: the loader with a busted knuckle still shoving shells in, the driver squinting into white and guessing about ditches, the gunner holding his breath until the commander tapped his shoulder. Someone called out, 2 more minutes. They heard a Panther fire at the spot they'd just left. The round tore through branches and ripped up an empty lane. The crew snapped into it. The driver popped the brake, the engine jumped, and they slid backward into a depression where the fog got even worse. The commander lifted his head maybe an inch and dropped back down. The gunner already had the new shot lined up because he'd been counting the turret movement while they drove. The loader grabbed the next shell and said on. When he looked down, 2 empty slots stared back at him where full ones had been an hour before. By mid-morning, they'd figured out how this worked. A flank wasn't really a place. It was something you had to keep making over and over. A shot took less than a second. Moving to the next spot took 30 seconds, maybe more. 3 minutes between positions. 2 rounds, then go. About 40 yards to the next bit of cover. While all this was happening, bigger numbers were moving in the fog too. German armor massed for a massive push. American tank destroyers spread thin across a salient. Some self-propelled guns down the line joined in. Someone called up priests, and they fired at shapes that only showed up when the shells hit. The blast rolled through the hedges and slammed the whole crew. The loader smacked the gunner's helmet. Not gently either, just shaking his head clear. He heard back to B. They didn't hesitate, they just went. Couple of times they took shots they weren't really happy about. Maybe a front quarter angle at a range the gunner was basically guessing. The round hit anyway, but they didn't stick around to see what happened. The commander said, "We're not here when they shoot back." The driver grinned, and dragged the hull backward through ruts he couldn't see. Felt the track slip and grab and slip again. That turret smelled like cordite and wool and wet canvas. Roberson checked the ammo count again, running low on one type, heavier on another. The crew swapped a loaded shell to match what they figured they'd see if something came out of the fog at about 40 meters. By afternoon, the fog would thin out a little, then roll back in like a door swinging on its hinge. They used those clear moments to shift position laterally, so when the next push came, the first German in line showed a different side to a different gun. The best armor was the space you weren't in anymore. Somewhere back at headquarters, someone had numbers on a board that would later add up to what happened this day. This crew didn't see that board. They saw a broken branch that might catch the barrel, a track mark stretching down the hedgerow that told them they'd stayed too long before. Late afternoon, a crew nearby got hit and stopped moving. The commander didn't say anything for about 5 seconds. Then, "We go now." The gunner had a shot lined up and wanted to take it. The commander wanted the crew. The round they wanted to fire became one they'd fire later from somewhere safer. As it got dark, Roberson wrote the last line. Held. The men dropped down one at a time, legs shaky, knees weak, now that the engine was off. Someone laughed for no reason. Another guy threw up quick behind the hedge and wiped his mouth. They'd made it through a day in fog by doing what they'd learned in the desert, choosing seconds over anything else, again and again. 2 to 3 minutes before the Germans fired where you used to be. 30 to 60 seconds to back into the next fold. Less than 10 seconds to load and call on. A handful of shells left in the rack. One good angle worth more than all the fog in the world if you got there first. The Hellcat was thin and fast and could outrun a heavier tank in this mess. Its power meant it could move laterally quicker than a Panther could even turn around. The turret swung fast and the gunner could hand aim at close range. The driver and commander found the folds in the ground that turned what should have been a head-to-head fight into a side shot. In clear weather at range, the heavy tank's optics and armor ran the day. In a whiteout at short range, whoever got an angle first won, and whoever stayed to watch their shot died. Somewhere in that gray field, a German crew was learning the exact same thing from the other end. Their round hit where Americans had been. Their commander swore, not because he was stupid, but because he was a professional who just found out the rules changed for the last hour. He started to order men out to scout the hedges, but he couldn't even see his own guys at 20 meters. He had to push forward because that was the order, because his clock was running just as fast as ours. The fog rolls in on September 20th, breaking apart and weaving back together between the hedges. Phil Hosey wakes up to the engine already running. His hands know what to do before the commander even says anything. The crews develop their own language. A squeeze on the shoulder means wait. 2 taps mean go. A flat palm means we're getting out of here. By mid-morning, they've run 2 flanks that look the same from up high, but feel like completely different places inside the turret. On the first run, the gunner spots part of a hull and takes the shot. It hits, and the enemy crew bails out through the smoke. On the second approach, the angle's wrong. The round just sparks off the armor, so the commander says, "We're not sticking around." They move, and 30 seconds later, heavy shells hammer the spot where they'd been sitting. The driver laughs. More of a cough, really. Fuel matters. When you burn down to the last third, everything smells different. Ammunition works the same way. The loader counts off on his thumb with those last 5 rounds in the ready racks, moving slower each time. Distance changes what it means. 40 meters to a fold in the ground is luck, but 150 meters across open ground is a gamble. The clock is what really matters. You can't see it, but you're running on it every second. A neighboring Hellcat radios in needing help. They've got the angle, but their gun won't drop low enough. Hosey's commander says, "On the way." They slide over, fire once, and slide back. From far away, it looks cocky, but inside the turret, it's just knowing you don't have the shot and finding someone who does. The radio fills with short words and long silences. The best calls are the ones nobody hears because the problem never becomes a problem. At midday, a Panther moves into a lane too fast, thinking speed will save it. But the Hellcat's already moving. The gunner calls out, "I have him." The commander takes a breath and says 1, giving the okay to fire. The round hits, and the driver's reversing before impact. The hedgerow explodes exactly where their barrel had been. The whole crew goes quiet for a while after that. Late afternoon, they get sent to a spot that already cost another tank. The tire tracks and burned hedge are still there. The driver sucks his teeth, says nothing, and takes a different route to get to a similar position. Make sure the gun doesn't point down the same line twice. Don't shop at the same store twice. Out there somewhere, the enemy's adapting too. Scouts probe forward. Infantry tries to keep up. Orders get stricter. The big tanks want to use their range and heavy armor, but can't in this fog. The men inside those tanks are just as brave and just as worn out. When the fog favors one side, it's not because one side's smarter. It's because one side knows how to leave. By evening, the crew starts falling apart in small ways. The loader's back tightens when he bends. The gunner's eyes blur for a second, then sting when they focus again. The driver's hands cramp and he shakes them out where nobody sees. The commander runs out of words and just points. The crew moves anyway. They know what that means. They settle into a fold that smells like crushed grass and oil. Someone brings rations nobody wants and hot coffee everyone does. A map shows up with lines and a battery officer tapping his pencil about firing angles. The crew listens because they want to be alive tomorrow. When they close their eyes that night, they still feel the turret against their shoulders and hear brass casings under their boots. In their dreams, they move before the next round lands, then wake up before it gets there. The brigade lost more tanks that morning than it could afford. The Americans held with fewer vehicles than any manual says is possible. Fuel and ammunition crews cycle in and out like the tide. Hosey's platoon stays in one spot less than 5 minutes when things get hot, 10 minutes max when the sky clears. The Hellcat's light and powerful, which makes it quick. At close range, the gun barely drops at all. What matters is how fast you can turn the turret and how quickly the commander can angle the hull to show a side plate. The driver reads the ground by sight when he can, by pure gut when he can't. He's looking for dips and dark lines that might be folds, listening for that change in engine sound that means the hull's about to shift. A heavy tank can do this stuff too, just slower. Speed buys you time. Time keeps you alive. They sleep in their boots again. The fog waits for them in the morning like a test you can't prepare for. You just have to survive it. December 14th, near Climbach, right by the German border. Snow everywhere, piled up in the ditches. Bare trees. That's where Major Charles Thomas showed up, commanding Company C of the 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion. He was leading from the front in his Jeep. His mission was straightforward. Get in, set up roadblocks, hold them long enough so the rest of the line could dig in. Towed tank destroyers aren't fast like Hellcats. They work differently. Mines, wire, fields of fire set up across fields and orchards. You hold a road through smart positioning, not speed. Thomas ordered his men forward. Immediately, bullets started coming, the kind that snap branches right off the trees. He made quick calls about where everything went. Then he got hit. He didn't leave. If he pulled back, those minutes would drag on. The road would stay open to the enemy. Everything would get backed up. But if he stayed right there until the line was solid enough to hold on its own, he shortened those minutes. He kept giving orders. Short, clear ones. Wire here, gun there. Keep that lane covered. He called in fire on the tree line where the enemy would regroup. He told a driver to move left a few feet to hide the gun behind a wall. He told a machine gun crew to fire bursts, not to kill, just to mark a line for infantry who couldn't see through the snow. The whole time he's bleeding, but he never stops talking. The guys who could see him, who could hear him, they felt it. That's what courage looks like. It's visible. Here's what matters. How long he spent under fire doing all this. Not seconds, minutes. Real long minutes. And what those minutes bought was a road the enemy couldn't use when they wanted it. When the guys who were there talked about it later, they just said one thing: he stayed until we could hold it without him. Now, the tools Thomas's company used don't sound impressive next to a roaring tank. Mines are quiet. Wire doesn't make noise. But these tools changed everything about what the enemy could do and when. A towed gun is just a barrel on a trail until someone decides where it goes and how long it stays. Thomas made those calls while he was bleeding. That kept a road closed when it had to stay closed. An enemy attack that expected to roll through easy would instead find themselves stuck behind obstacles and guns that shouldn't even be there yet. A defense by guys nobody expected to hold it. You control the seconds, you control the fight, whether you've got heavy armor or not. The speed comes from having obstacles pre-positioned, fields of fire already worked out, practice drills for getting guns in place under pressure. You put a gun where it can cover a road, dig in the trails, sight on landmarks, use mines and wire to force an attacker to show their side at exactly the right spot. You do it fast enough under fire that the enemy arrives to a problem they didn't see coming. Thomas turned minutes into protection for his whole line. Eventually they evacuated him, but not before the line was solid enough that him leaving wouldn't create a hole. The awards came later. But the guys who were actually there remembered something different. They remembered his voice, the kind of voice you could stand inside of while the snow blew around them. Years later, they'd talk about it quietly. He was hit, and he stayed, and that was all they needed to say. A road held closed for hours. A wounded officer staying in place for minutes to make that happen. Obstacles positioned before the first big push. The distance, just a few yards, where a towed gun turns a road into a death trap. That's the margin between good cover and getting completely exposed. Hold this road. The answer wasn't, we'll try. The answer was a set of actions measured in minutes, carried out when it actually mattered. It's December 19th in Stavelot. Snow crunches under boots, exhaust hangs in the cold air, and the narrow lanes echo with sound bouncing off the houses. Sergeant Clyde Gentry's crew is moving through it. PFC, Robert Kraut, T. 5, Raymond Clements, Sergeant Clarence West, and Corporal Buell Sheridan, all under 2nd Lieutenant Arion Revis. What they're up against are King Tigers from the SS Panzer Unit 501. These are massive machines, heavily armored up front, loud as locomotives, rumbling through a tunnel. The first Tiger shows up as a vibration before anything else. Too much metal, moving too fast. The crew hears it coming before they even see it. When they do, it's just a wall of steel. But in street fighting, angles are everything, especially in an open-topped tank where you can see more than you're supposed to. Gentry's driver edges the nose along a building wall, then cuts across a side street. 3 seconds, that's all they get. In those 3 seconds, the gunner spots where the side armor meets the front wheel. Got it, the commander says, breath visible in the cold turret. Left, fire. The round hits. The Tiger lurches, smoke pours from underneath, and they hear the engine choking out. No time to watch. Back, back, move. They're already rolling. A shell tears into the stone right where they were standing. They pull back and take the next street. It's all about timing, distance, where you hit, how fast you move, and not wasting seconds. The gun isn't magic. It's a 3-inch barrel with decent ammunition hitting the right spot. What helps is being open-topped. At close range, the commander can see with his whole body, flatten the tank against walls, use angles that a closed turret would never let him reach. Another heavy appears down the street. Another M10 in the platoon has a better shot at it. Revis coordinates. Now they've got the street working as a trap from 2 angles. The crews talk like mechanics, passing tools. Quick, exact, no wasted words, just the next move. One Tiger stops. A third rounds a corner and exposes a slice of side armor, barely bigger than a door. But that's enough. You don't need a huge target, just the right one. They fire once and disappear. When the wall explodes behind them, they're already gone. The German crews know their business. These are famous machines fighting in streets where everything comes down to inches. A side plate at close range loses all that thickness advantage if you hit it right. The American gun doesn't need to punch through the thickest armor. It just needs to break something the tank can't live without. The engine, the transmission, a track that keeps the whole thing moving. Do that, and the big gun up front becomes useless. After that, the angles don't work in the Tiger's favor anymore. The open-topped M10 sees faster, moves faster, and doesn't give you a second chance. They make it through the day, they file their reports, names get written down, the town hears the fighting and sees the smoke. 4 weeks later, on January 18th, Sergeant Clyde Gentry is killed in action. What's left are the orders. Take the wheel. Got it, left, fire, back, move. Multiple heavy tanks credited to one crew, all within 200 meters, never staying in one place longer than 30 seconds. 10 to 20 moves in a single day. One man's life, ending a month later. A winter field stretches out, wide open and empty. An M36 tank with a 90mm gun sits tucked into a dip in the ground. Lieutenant Alfred Rose's crew has been waiting quietly for a while now. Then something appears on the horizon, barely visible at first. Just a shape. It shifts, Light catches the side of it, and suddenly there's a vehicle exposed in a way it shouldn't be. "Hold," someone whispers. "Hold, now." The shot takes a long second to reach its target. If it connects, the crew has a choice: stay put or move. If it misses, the other gun fires from a new spot before anyone can even react to the first shot. They're thousands of yards apart. The margin for error is razor thin. It's the same choice they'd face in a city at point-blank range. Take the one good shot you've got, or wait for something better that might never come. The crew doesn't hesitate. They fire, then they're already moving before the round even hits. In a fight, seconds are all you can afford to lose. When winter comes back around, names get read aloud in quiet rooms. Ray Desfosses and his crew in Tunisia didn't wait. They fired and moved before the enemy could even respond. First Sergeant Roy Roberson knew how to read a map like a clock, turning fog and distance into seconds that mattered. Phil Hosey drove a Hellcat tank destroyer that could find angles other crews missed, always hitting the flanks where tanks were exposed. Major Charles Thomas took actual minutes and turned them into decisive action on a closed road at Climbach. Sergeant Clyde Gentry's crew, Robert Kraut, Raymond Clements, Clarence West, and Buell Sheridan, faced tanks everyone thought were unbeatable and proved that paint and prestige mean nothing if you find the right shot. The evidence is all there on paper. A presidential unit citation from Tunisia earned when a ridge held by men who understood what it meant to stand their ground. A medal upgraded for a commander who stayed in the fight until it finally went his way. Battle maps from Lorraine showing where attacks stalled in the fog, where plans hit reality and had to change. A line in a unit history: 4 King Tigers destroyed in a freezing town. A diary entry at the end of the day that just says, held. Nothing more. Tanks with thick front armor believed they were untouchable. They learned too late that a side is just another front. Meanwhile, tank destroyer crews in thin-skinned vehicles, outgunned in any head-to-head fight, learn something different. Speed is your only armor when you've got maybe 3 minutes. It's simple math. A gun, a road, a man deciding whether to take one more shot or live to fight another day. When the fog cleared at Arracourt, you could smell wet grass and gunpowder. Engines ticked as they cooled. A crewman sat scraping mud off his boot with a knife from the desert, but it wouldn't come clean. The day had already settled the argument. Heavy armor doesn't matter. Speed and angles do. That's how American tank destroyer crews, lighter, thinner-skinned, outgunned, beat heavier tanks in the battles that counted.